Good morning, ladies. I thought I would just sit with you this morning and make ourselves comfortable while we share in this special time together. It is so good to see this gym so full today and have each one of you here this morning. I am truly humbled and honored to be up here speaking to you today. My name is Lisa McCann. My husband Mike and I live in Milford and attend Cornerstone Church here. We have an awesome family. My oldest daughter you just met. I have a 9-year-old granddaughter, Ella. Emily is my middle daughter, who just got married in October, so I now have a new son-in-law, Mason, who is one of the servers this morning. Next is my bonus son, Noah, who got married last year to my daughter-in-law, Taylor. And finally, our youngest daughter is Hope, who dates a young man we call Killy, and we certainly hope he eventually will be joining our family. It's so amazing to me how God works. A year ago this past September, I was on a walk listening to a podcast. It was a man sharing about how he went forward in life after his wife was murdered while on the mission field. He talked about how God's grace got him through that unimaginable time and how he felt called to share that there is hope beyond tragedy. As I listened to it, it took me back to my own journey with my son and how God carried our family through, and how we experienced God's grace through unspeakable grief. I began to be overwhelmed that I needed to share my testimony about what happened to my son Joshua and how God carried us, healed us, and equipped us to move forward in our lives. I came straight in the house that day, called my daughter Amber, literally in tears, saying, I think God wants me to give a testimony about Joshua. As the weeks went on, that feeling didn't go away, but got stronger. I would be in prayer time and I would be like, I know I need to commit to a date, but life is busy and I didn't do it. I remember even praying one day, Lord, if there's a particular Sunday you want me to do this, then show me. And he did just that. Our minister, PJ, called me the first week of December, and he asked if I would be willing to give a testimony on Christmas Day. It was a Sunday about a way that God moved in my life around Christmas time. I got a full body chill. PJ knew nothing about my intention to do a testimony at some point. I don't think I had ever shared with him any details about Joshua's life or our journey with him. He was just aware that we had lost a son to cancer. So when God answers your prayer and tells you what Sunday to speak, you do it. Many of you here today heard that testimony last Christmas. After sharing that testimony, I was asked by Women's Ministry here at Cornerstone to be your speaker today. So I am in awe of how God works, how he moved my spirit that day in September of 22 to open up a part of my heart that I mostly keep closed, to step out in faith to share with you about a little boy named Joshua Longest, how God richly blessed us with this precious life and how he used him to teach us lessons that will continue to guide us through this life until we are reunited with him someday. On May 27th, 1990, the Lord blessed us with a precious little baby boy we named Josh. He was a healthy little brown-eyed boy that kept us on our toes. He was growing and developing normally up until about age 3.5. He began to tire easily, lost his appetite, among some other things. Of course, that started the long, drawn-out process of going to doctors for the next 8 months, trying to get answers, as these symptoms only worsened as time went on. Eventually, we got on an appointment with a gastroenterologist at Carl, who knew right away what we were dealing with. Joshua had a large cancerous tumor growing in his abdomen. We headed immediately to Riley's Children's Hospital in Indianapolis to pursue diagnosis and treatment. Josh was diagnosed with stage 3 aggressive cancer called alveolar rhabdomyosarcoma. It's a mouthful. He was going to need several months of radiation and chemotherapy to shrink the tumor, and then would need surgery to remove the tumor, and then more chemotherapy. It was a long year. We don't have the time this morning to talk about all the ways that God was present in our lives that year. Of course, we battled with the whys, but there was no denying God was with us. At the time when Josh was diagnosed, our family didn't go to church. I grew up Lutheran, so I believed in God, but was not a follower. A minister of a local church came to us, and he walked with us through that entire journey. And during that first year, he shared the love and truth of Jesus with us. And so we were baptized and started attending church regularly. When the year of treatment was over, the doctors told us that there was no trace of Joshua's tumor. They told us to go home and resume life, and we did. Life was back to normal until a year later when he began to complain about pain in his arm. He was at an age where it was normal to have growing pains, so for a while we thought that's all it was. However, he started complaining daily to the point that we couldn't ignore it. It was getting close to time for a checkup with the doctors at Riley, so we just decided to take him over there and have them check him out. I really didn't worry, though, that it was anything serious. I just thought, let's see what is bugging him and get it taken care of so we can get back to life. Because after all, the doctors had told us it was gone, so it couldn't be the cancer. They started the testing process, and by the end of that day, the doctor walked in with the reason he was hurting in his arm. His cancer had returned and was growing on his spine, pushing on nerves that went to his arm. This tumor was inoperable, and the only way to treat it was more chemotherapy. But this time with little hope from the doctors that he would get better someday, but that they would do their best to provide Joshua with as much quality of life as they could. I thought that the first diagnosis was devastating. It didn't compare to the second. So I moved right past the whys and went right to being very angry with God. I cried out to him a lot over the next few days, so many times. I was so confused. And it wasn't long, though, before I began to feel God's presence in a way I had never before. I was starting to experience what God's grace was all about. And I dipped into that well of his grace on a daily basis, and it never ran out in the days, weeks, months, and years ahead. Joshua battled his illness for 4 more years, way more time than doctors ever thought we would have with him. What a journey that was. Today I want to talk to you about that journey. What happened during his dash, that little line between May 27th, 1990 and January 10th, 2000? There's a poem I'd like to read to you. It's called The Dash. I read of a man who stood to speak at the funeral of a friend. He referred to the dates on the tombstone from the beginning to the end. He noted that first came the date of birth and spoke with the following date with tears. But he said what mattered most of all was the dash between the years. For that dash represents all the time that they spent alive on earth. And now only those who love them know what that little line is worth. For it matters not how much we own, the cars, the house, the cash. What matters is how we live and love and how we spend our dash. So think about this long and hard. Are there things you'd like to change? For you never know how much time is left that could still be rearranged. If we could just slow down enough to consider what's true and real, and always try to understand the way other people feel, and be less quick to anger and show appreciation more, and love the people in our lives like we've never loved before. If we treat each other with respect and more often wear a smile, remembering the special dash might only last a little while. So when your eulogy is being read, with your life's actions to rehash, would you be proud of the things they say about how you spent your dash? Someone brought me that poem after Josh passed. She said, I think Joshua's dash should have been a smile. This little guy had a beautiful smile, and he rarely did not have one on his face. He got down, of course, from time to time, but not for long. He had an amazing ability to shake it off and maintain a positive attitude. It was like when our Heavenly Father allowed Joshua to get cancer, he also gifted him with strength, with compassion, with love, and with wisdom, so that Joshua could be used mightily in his 5-year battle with his disease. The Lord taught us so many lessons through him. And yes, I said, when our Heavenly Father allowed him to get cancer, everything we go through in this life is Father-filtered. God didn't give him cancer, but he did allow it for his purpose. People have said through the years, how can you believe in a God who would allow that to happen to your son? And after what I've experienced, I say, how could I not? God created a perfect world in the beginning, but because man chose to sin against God, sin entered the world. Disease entered the world. As unimaginable as that time was, God used that child, our family, that journey for his purpose. I didn't see that clearly then, trust me. But over the years, it's become easier to see how God has brought beauty from ashes, how he is still working, as I'm here today speaking to you. The whole Christmas story shows us that sometimes when God doesn't make sense in the moment, his plan can leave us asking, how can this be? I ask this question more times than I can count. Sometimes it's not until it's over, in our peripheral, that we can see what God was planning and doing all along. The Christmas story reminds us that even when we are confused, God never is. There's nothing special about our journey. Many people walk this path. Many parents walk this path. The difference is in choosing how am I going to respond to what's happening. We chose early on that no matter what, we were going to trust God through it all. There were bad days. There were horrible days. There were good days. There were awesome days. God's grace was always there, giving us just enough light to take the next step. I had a little brother. His name was David, and he died before I was born. He was 5 years old when he passed away. He died from a freak farm accident. My parents stayed angry at God. They turned on each other. My dad turned on, even blamed, my older brother Bruce, who was outside playing with David when the accident happened. I can't imagine having that kind of guilt as an 8-year-old little boy. I was born a year and a half later into a troubled family, into a family that didn't trust God through that tragedy, but held on to that resentment, that anger and confusion, and carried it with them their whole lives. The result? Well, my dad died of a sudden heart attack at age 58. He was an angry man, very abusive to my older brother Bruce. My mom just buried everything in her heart and physically. There were no pictures up of him anywhere. She rarely spoke of him. I was playing in a drawer as a child one day and found a picture of him. My brother Bruce started drinking at a very young age and never stopped. He died at age 45, a severe alcoholic. I can't stress this more. You cannot bury grief. If you try to ignore it and not deal with it, it will manifest itself in other ways, and it did. It breaks my heart what they went through. I don't judge them. I just chose to learn from their experience. So, all this to say, even though I did not understand at all why this was happening to Josh or our family, I knew I had to hold on to Jesus tightly and not let go. I was not going to walk the path the same way that my parents did. What I came to realize was that Josh was a gift, as are all of our children. He was a gift from God. God gave him to us, and that means Josh was God's first. Sometimes these precious gifts from God are only meant to be with us a little while. And that's not easy to accept, trust me. But when I started to surrender to that realization, it gave me peace. And am I ever glad that my God chose me, trusted me, to be his mama, even if it was only for 9 years. When I spoke last Christmas, I focused on how God got us through our last Christmas with Josh, and the first Christmas without him. I talked about our Joshua tree. A friend gave me a book called A December to Grief. And in that book, it suggested putting up a tree every Christmas with ornaments on it that remind you of your loved one. Our family and friends did not disappoint. I wanted to bring his tree here today so that you could see all the wonderful ornaments that were placed on it and the memory shared. And I'd like to talk about this one. I know every one of us here this morning has walked through difficult times, are walking through a difficult time, or will at some point be going through a difficult time. How many of us get discouraged? Well, we had a lot of those days, and there were times when God used just the right person to do or say just the right thing to help get us over that bump in the road called discouragement. Josh was in treatment one Christmas season, and with that comes weakness, fatigue, and all sorts of other unpleasant symptoms. So consequently, he didn't get to do things that other kids were getting to do, and he would get discouraged. At times, this mama's heart would break watching his disappointment and not being able to have adequate words to help comfort him. But one Sunday that year, during the Christmas season, someone walked forward in our Sunday school class as it was starting and asked if she could read a book to us. She had no idea what feelings of discouragement we were dealing with at the time, but God did when he moved her to purchase the book. This was the book. It's called The Crippled Lamb. And I'm not going to read the whole book, but I want to read enough so you can understand why this book impacted us. Once upon a time, in a sunny valley, there lived a little lamb named Joshua. He was white with black spots, black feet, and sad eyes. Josh felt sad when he saw the other sheep with their moms and dads because he didn't have a mom or a dad. But he felt saddest when he saw the other lambs running and jumping because he couldn't. Josh had been born with one leg that didn't work right. He was crippled. He always limped when he walked. That's why he always watched while the other lambs ran and played. Josh felt sad and alone, except when his friend Abigail was around. She was Josh's best friend. She was an old cow. Some of Josh's favorite hours were spent with Abigail. It made Josh sad to be the only lamb who could not run and play in the grass. And that's when Abigail would turn to him and say, "Don't be sad, little Joshua. God has a special place for those who feel left out." The shepherds decided to take the lambs to the next valley where there was more grass. All the sheep were excited when the shepherd told them they were going to a new meadow. As they prepared to leave, Joshua hobbled over and took his place at the edge of the group. But the others started laughing at him. "You're too slow to go all the way to the next valley. Go back, slowpoke." Josh looked up and saw the shepherd standing in front of him. "They are right, my little Joshua. You better go back. This trip is too long for you. Go and spend the night in the stable." Josh began limping away. Never before had Josh felt so left out as he watched the other sheep head towards the green grass. Slowly, him and Abigail turned and walked back to the stable together. Josh ate, then laid down by Abigail in the straw. He was very tired. He fell asleep, but suddenly a strange noise woke him up. They looked across the dimly lit stable. There, lying on some fresh hay, was a baby. A young woman was resting on a big pile of hay beside the feed box. Josh and Abigail were confused as to what was going on. Josh limped across the stable. He stopped next to the mother and looked into the baby's face. The baby was crying. He was cold. The woman picked up the baby and put him on the hay next to her. Josh looked around the stable for something to keep the baby warm. Usually there were blankets, but not tonight. Then Josh remembered his own soft, warm wool. He walked over and curled up close to the baby. "Thank you, little lamb," said the mother softly. Soon the little child stopped crying. About that time, a man walked into the stable. He told Mary he was sorry, but he could only find some rags, as the shepherds had taken all the blankets with them. She said, "It's okay. This little lamb has kept the king warm." A king? Joshua looked at the baby and wondered who he might be. "His name is Jesus, God's son," Mary spoke as if she knew Joshua's question. Just then, there was another noise at the door. It was the shepherds, the ones who left Joshua behind. They said, "We saw a bright light and heard the angels." Then they saw Josh next to the baby. "Joshua," they said, "do you know who this baby is?" The young mother said, "He does now. God heard your prayers, little lamb." Joshua looked down at the baby, and somehow he knew this was a special child, and this was a special moment. He also understood why he had been born with a crippled leg. Since he was different, he was the one in the stable that night to welcome Jesus into the world. He told his friend Abigail, "You're right. God had a special place for me." As she read the book that morning, the tears flowed. How did she know? After class, she gave us the book. It serves every year as a reminder that God was with us and used that book to encourage our little boy. One of our friends in that class that morning placed that ornament on his tree, sharing how much that book impacted her and how she still thinks about how God used Joshua in spite of his disabilities and how he can use each of us no matter our circumstances. Earlier, I mentioned how I think God gifted Josh with a huge, kind heart. Still today, I think back on times when I remember Joshua showing love, unconditional love, and it reminds me how I should be treating others and perhaps respond differently in some situations. Two particular incidences stand out to me. We were at Riley's hospital one day for some testing and treatment. That day, we were running late for an appointment, so this mama was quickly pushing his wheelchair through the hospital. As we were rushing through, we passed another mom who was pushing her little boy. I didn't even notice that her little boy had held his hand out to Joshua as we passed by. Joshua said, "Mom, stop, back up." Well, I'm embarrassed to say that I snapped, "Joshua, we need to keep moving. We're going to be late for this appointment." But he insisted. He called out to the little guy, and his mom turned around and came back. The little boy reached out his hand, and Josh took it as he briefly talked with him. I can still remember the big smile on that little guy's face. As I looked at the mom, she was so overwhelmed. She thanked me for stopping and said, "We had just left the gift shop. I asked him, 'Is there something that I can get for you?' And he told me that he wanted a friend." She went on to thank Josh and I for that simple act of kindness. It wasn't me, though. It was all him. Yet another way God used Josh to teach me a lesson of love and kindness that helps shape my actions today. The second one I'd like to share with you will forever be ingrained in my heart. I watched Josh extend love that was nothing short of him being an extension of the arms of Jesus. I talked earlier about my brother Bruce, who, because of circumstances in his life, he went through life angry and ashamed. This resulted in him becoming a lifelong alcoholic. Bruce was in and out of our lives. He was married for a short time, then divorced due to the drinking. He couldn't hold a job. He frequently would come around asking for money and then would be gone again. Underneath it all, he also had a big heart. He loved his nieces and nephews. He didn't have children of his own. We all loved him, but I have to admit, I would frequently get quite frustrated with him. One particular day, it was in the winter because I remember a lot of snow on the ground. It was the last winter Josh was with us, and over the weekend we noticed that one of Joshua's eyes started protruding, as well as a bulge coming from the side of his temple. Clearly there was another tumor growing and was putting pressure behind his eye. We were to be at Riley's first thing in the morning to start radiation to that area. When Josh woke that morning, he was having severe dizziness and nausea as a result from the tumor. All he could do is lay on the couch. Any movement only exacerbated his symptoms. About midday, I was walking past our picture window, and I saw Bruce out there in the front of our home on his knees digging a hole in the snow to hide his beers that he was carrying. Someone had dropped him off to see Josh. We didn't have cell phones back then, so that he could call first and let us know he was on his way. Instantly, I was angry. I thought, what are you doing here today, of all days? He was unkempt. When he walked in the door, you could smell him right away. He was drunk. He said, I want to see Josh. I said, today's not a good day. That's when I heard his voice from the living room. Uncle Bruce? He walked past me and stood in the doorway of our living room. I looked in the living room, and there was Josh sitting up on the couch, holding his arms out to him. Bruce dropped to his knees and crawled across the floor to him. Josh embraced him, and they held each other and told each other how much they loved each other. Josh didn't care he had been drinking or that he smelled. Never have I witnessed something that depicts the kind of love that Jesus has for us. The words in the Bible came to life for me at that moment, as Jesus tells us to come as we are. I'm happy to say that quite a while later, on that same couch, Bruce accepted Jesus as his Savior. Joshua passed away on a dark, cold, gray Monday morning in January, surrounded by his family. Eventually, I walked away from the bed and stood off to the side, composing myself. All of a sudden, Emily, our 7-year-old at the time, said, Mommy, look. I turned around, and there was a stream of light coming through the window above the bed he was lying on, shining right over him. We were speechless, except for Emily. She was squealing with excitement. Josh is in heaven. He's dancing on the streets of gold. Josh would ask that question often. Mommy, do you think the streets are really made of gold in heaven? Josh was physically gone. Now came the time to navigate through life without him and deal with the giant of grief. Grief so deep made my heart hurt more than I ever thought possible. But God didn't leave us there. I want to share 2 examples, just 2 examples, there's more, but of how God was so faithful to bless us with what I believe to be nothing short of God encounters. On the day of his funeral, so many people were giving us things. Someone gathered them all into a basket and gave them to us. That basket was set aside when we got home. A couple weeks later, I was sitting there, and that basket caught my eye. In it was this book. Then I remembered the day of the funeral. Our family was all in a room waiting for the funeral to start, and there was a knock on the door. There stood a lady from our church holding this book. She said, Lisa, months ago I was in a bookstore and seen this book, and I suddenly had an overwhelming feeling come over me to buy this book for you. I knew I was supposed to give it to you, but I held on to it because I was hoping and praying for a miracle. She said, I know God wants you to have this. Well, I picked that book up and I began to turn the pages. The title alone had me intrigued, as the very title of the book is something he would say. He hated to see anyone cry. I would try my best not to cry in front of him, but sometimes it was unavoidable, and he would say, Mommy, please don't cry. Now, I need to set this up for you just a bit so that you will be able to see why this book was so meaningful. Only God could have orchestrated everything that was said at just the right time. Josh and I had many, many talks during the months prior to his passing. We talked a lot about heaven. A month before he died, he lost the use of his legs, and he would ask me, Mommy, when am I going to be able to run and play again? We were lying on the floor one night, and he started talking about how he wished our house had secret hideouts. I thought, where in the world did that come from? His sister Amber was there, and she said, well, one of my friends has a secret passageway in her home. And he goes, I think that would be so cool. Then there was the morning of his funeral. His dad and I were sitting there talking about him and wondering what he was doing up there. Josh was a social butterfly. I said, I'll bet he found Noah, and he's asking him all about that big boat. We just smiled. He loved his birthday parties, and his favorite was his Grandma Betty's chocolate cake. He was very scared of the dark. He repeatedly would call out, Mommy, Daddy, are you there? And finally, one of my favorite memories is how he would rock in the chair as I stroked his hair or bald head, and we would have I love you contests. I love you more, I love you more than, and this would go on until he would end it with I love you to infinity and beyond, because he was a huge fan at the time of Buzz Lightyear. If I could, I'd like to read this book to you. And unfortunately, it has a very paradoxical effect from the title of the book. Mommy, please don't cry. A beautiful angel carried me here. I met Jesus today, Mommy. He cradled me in his big, strong arms, and he made me feel so happy inside. Mommy, please don't cry. Heaven is wonderful. Did you know the streets are made of gold? Real gold. I have lots of friends, Mommy. We run and play, we giggle and laugh. I can't wait to show you all my secret hideouts. Mommy, please don't cry. When I fall, it doesn't hurt. There are no tears in heaven. I met a man named Noah. He told me all about his big boat. all the animals, and the very first rainbow. Have you heard of Noah, Mommy? Mommy, please don't cry. We have lots of parties here with streamers and hats and the best chocolate cake ever. When it's time to rest, angels tuck us in. I never get scared, Mommy. There's no darkness here. Jesus is the light of heaven. Mommy, please don't cry. The angels are always singing. I love to sing with the angels. I have a pretty good voice. I must have gotten it from you. There's a river, Mommy, in the most beautiful garden you could ever imagine, and a huge tree with yummy fruit. The angels call it the tree of life. Mommy, it's so wonderful to be alive in heaven. Mommy, please don't cry. Sometimes I just like to be by myself, and that's when I think of you. Someday, Mommy, we will hold each other tight. Then you will cradle me in your arms and stroke my hair, and once again our hearts will beat together. Mommy, please don't cry. I'll wait right here for you. Even though I knew in my heart that Josh was in heaven, as a mother, you can't shake the is he okay? Does he need anything? Who's watching over him? This book provided a peace over me that day I desperately needed. God knew I was going to need that, a book that stays on my dresser to this day, so that daily I look at it, knowing with certainty where he is and that he's doing just fine. But God didn't stop there. His grace and presence was felt in so many different ways through the next weeks, months, and years ahead. About 6 weeks after Josh passed, I was reading a story about a little 6-year-old boy who was playing in his yard. He got hit and killed by a car as he chased his ball into the street. The story was told by his mother. She told that for weeks she prayed that God would bring her son to her in a dream so she could say goodbye. Accidents rob us of saying goodbye to our loved ones. Well, God answered her prayers, and one night she fell asleep, and her little boy came running towards her. She scooped him up as he ran into her arms, and she was able to hear him say, I love you. She recalled that she even could smell his familiar scent. It gave her spirit peace to go on in her life. Well, after that story, you know what my prayer was. I began to pray for such an experience. A couple weeks later, on a Sunday morning, our family was just getting to church. I no more than walked through the front door when one of Joshua's classmates and friend came running up to me. Her name was Rachel. She was 9 years old. She had been waiting for me to arrive that morning. She was waiting by the door. She excitedly squealed, I saw Josh last night. I didn't know how to respond. I was like, you did? I was confused as to where this was going. She said, last night I fell asleep and I was in heaven. I was walking by this river where there was this line of people, and she said, all of a sudden I heard someone calling my name. I looked, and it was Josh. He was happy to see me, and we played for a while. He kept saying something to me, though. I couldn't understand what he was trying to tell me. She went on to say that he kept tapping his chest, saying, it's gone, Rachel, it's gone. I asked her what was gone. She said, I don't know, I couldn't understand him. I kind of sounded like he said my six-pack was gone. Instantly, I was overwhelmed. I knew exactly what he was saying. She wouldn't have known what he was saying because he didn't talk hardly at all to his friends about things associated with his disease. Joshua had a port that was underneath his skin on his chest. That port was accessed for IV medications and blood draws. It was very convenient for nurses, but he hated it. The last few weeks of his life, his port was accessed continuously as he was on a morphine pump to manage his pain. He asked me days before he passed, when can I get this taken out, Mommy? And I encouraged him, soon, Josh, very soon, knowing in my heart it wouldn't be until on this side of heaven. Well, another medical term for this is a portacath. Portacath? Six-pack? Good guess for a 9-year-old who doesn't know anything about those kind of things. I knew instantly this dream was the real thing and that God was allowing him to let us know he was okay. He no longer was having to contend with pain and everything associated with cancer. I couldn't stop crying and thanking God for answering my prayer. I asked our minister at the time, why do you think God didn't answer my prayer like I had asked, like the woman in the story? Why did he use Rachel? In all of his wisdom, he answered, because that mother needed closure. She didn't get a chance to tell her son goodbye. He said, I think God knew you wouldn't be satisfied with just one more encounter. I thought about that, and I had to admit he was absolutely right. And to use a child, Rachel was so innocent that morning. She didn't hesitate to share what she had experienced, not trying to analyze the dream or explain it away like we do as adults. The Bible talks about having faith like a child. Her parents shared that she came running into their room as soon as she woke up that morning, so excited that she had seen Josh and got to play with him. She was so excited to tell me about it. People still ask me why I think bad things happen in this world. My answer to that is I have absolutely no idea. But this is what I can tell you. If you will just surrender your need to know and trust the one who does. It's that easy to do. Is it that easy to do? Oh my goodness, no. But if you commit to trusting him through it all, he will lead you through those valleys to the other side. I encourage you on those dark days, when you feel alone and don't think God is there, pray that he shows you he's there. He will. He uses all kinds of ways to do that. I also encourage you that if God lays someone on your heart that is going through a difficult time, don't put off reaching out to them. You may literally be an answer to someone's prayer, the very thing they may need to get through that day. God also used Joshua to help guide us, his family, in moving forward with our lives. About a month before he died, he was sleeping most of the time. I was making supper one night, and he called me in there. I went in there and laid beside him on the bed, and he said, "Mom, I want you and Dad to go on and have another baby." Left me speechless. Broke my heart that these kind of things were weighing on his heart. I just responded, "We'll see, Joshua." Well, I had my tubes tied after our daughter Emily was born, so I knew that wasn't going to happen. A few months later, our family was watching a documentary on TV about little girls in China and how there's hundreds of baby girls in those orphanages needing adopted out. My heart was moved instantly, and I said right away, we should look into bringing one of these little girls home into our family. The kid's dad at the time was not at all interested in that. However, a few months later, he was. He approached me and he said, "Are you still interested in looking into adopting one of those baby girls?" To make a very long story and a whole nother testimony short, on a year and a half later, we were on a plane flying to China to bring home one of those little China dolls into our family. I thought a lot about what to name her, and then one day it was so clear: Hope. She was not to replace him, but God certainly used her to show us life goes on. Corrie ten Boom was a Holocaust survivor who lived through unimaginable things. She wrote several books. She was quoted in saying, "I know that the experiences of our lives, when we let God use them, become the mysterious and perfect preparation for the work he will give us to do." For 5 years, I took care of Joshua, doing things I never thought I could do. But God used that time to prepare me for how he wanted me to move forward with my life. Being a nurse was never something I had wanted to do. But when it came time to think about what I needed to do, nursing was laid heavily on my heart. Our hospice nurses were wonderful. We'll never forget them. From the start of that journey of becoming a nurse, I knew that I wanted to pay it forward and become a hospice nurse, and that is what I do today, along with a little background of how I got here. Because of what his oldest sister Amber went through during his illness, when she graduated high school, she knew right away she wanted to be a social worker to help people. God has prepared and equipped one of the best therapists I've ever known. She's helped and continues to help people navigate through their difficulties every day. His youngest sister, Emily, is also a nurse, and a gifted one at that. Just another way that God made beauty from ashes. I had some people tell me after he died, "I think he was an angel sent to you." Well, I can tell you with certainty he was not an angel. He was a normal little boy who fought with his sisters from time to time, struggled with sharing. When feeling good, he was ornery. Like when his mother fell asleep on the way home from the hospital, and I couldn't move when I went to get out of the car because he had tied my shoestrings together. Joshua had a real love-hate relationship with the family cat at the time. So when he got a new Nerf gun that could shoot multiple darts at a time, he was anxious to try it out. He strapped on that new gun and said, "Here, kitty, kitty," which is one of the memories and ornaments. He was a precious little boy who was gifted to us to enjoy for 9 years and to teach us lessons that will last a lifetime. Am I ever glad that God trusted me to be his mom? Can't tell you how thankful I am to be able to have been given this opportunity to share with you our story. I wasn't sure why God moved my spirit that day in September a year and a half ago to share my testimony about Josh, almost 24 years later, but he clearly provided 2 platforms to do so. Our story is one of hope, and that is what I want your takeaway from today to be. I don't know what your circumstances are, what they will be, or maybe you're struggling with something that's happened in your past and you're not sure how to get beyond it. I can't encourage you enough to humbly pray, "Lord, show me you're with me. Tell him you don't understand what's happening. Ask him to teach you how to surrender it to him and trust him with it." Everyone's story is different, and we all have a story. But the one thing we all have in common is the author of the stories. Towards the end of our time at Riley's Children's Hospital, they had implemented something they were doing for the kiddos who completed their treatments. They would place a medallion around their neck, symbolizing they had won their fight against cancer. Josh saw a child getting their medallion one day when we were at Clinic B. He asked when he would get his. He really wanted that medallion. I sadly don't remember a lot about the night of his funeral visitation and who came through that line, but I will never forget when those 3 nurses from Riley's hospital came through. And when they went to his casket and they placed that gold medallion around his neck, he had finished the race of a life well lived. And I know that when Josh met Jesus, he heard, "Well done, Joshua, well done."